There is a specific kind of moment, and I want you to understand this before I tell you anything else, where a man stops feeling and starts calculating. It does not announce itself. There is no dramatic shift in the music, no cold wine through an open window. Something inside you simply goes very still, cold, quiet, and precise, like a machine finding its correct position. I have only felt that twice in my life. The first time was the night my father died. The second time was a Tuesday in October, at approximately 9:47 in the evening, when I walked into my own house and heard my wife's voice coming from the hallway floor. My name is Gerald Hayward. I am 64 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, on the east side, on a street called Birchwood Terrace, in a house I've owned for 31 years. I work as a retired civil engineer. 38 years with the State Transportation Department before I took my pension at 62, and I spend most of my time now consulting part-time for a firm downtown, which is the only reason I was in Charlotte, North Carolina for 4 days in October when none of this should have been able to happen. I drive a 2011 Ford F-150, dark blue, which my wife Barbara has been asking me to trade in since 2019. I have not traded it in. It runs fine. I see no reason to fix what is not broken. Barbara and I have been married for 39 years. She is a retired school librarian. She has 2 things wrong with her heart: a mitral valve issue that has been monitored since 2014, and a blood pressure condition that requires daily medication, and more than medication, requires that she not spend long periods of time alone on her feet in a state of stress. Her cardiologist, Dr. Yvonne Marsh at Ohio Health Riverside, has been very clear about this for the better part of a decade. Barbara is not fragile. She would be furious at me for using that word, but she has specific needs, and those needs are not complicated. And the people in this story knew every single one of them. We have one son. His name is Raymond. He is 38 years old. He works in commercial real estate in Columbus. A good job. A job I helped him get through a contact I had for my years with the department. A fact I mention not to take credit, but because it matters later. Raymond is married to a woman named Stacy. Stacy is 36. Her parents are Dale and Patrice Holbrook. They live in Westerville, which is about 22 minutes north of us. They are the kind of people who arrive at your home uninvited and somehow make you feel like you are the guest. I say this having observed it for 11 years. I say it without exaggeration. Raymond and Stacy lived with us for 8 months in 2019, while their condo renovation ran over budget and over schedule. During that time, I co-signed their refinance mortgage, $312,000, Columbus Midland Bank, March 2020. I also covered Raymond's car insurance because he had let it lapse during a particularly scattered 6 months in his early 30s, and I had never gotten around to removing myself from the policy because it never seemed urgent. I say all of this so that when I describe what happened at 2:11 in the morning on October the 12th, you understand it was not impulsive. Every number had a name. Every name had a phone number, and I had all of them in a folder on my laptop that I had never needed to open before that night. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. I think you'll want to be here for this. I had been in Charlotte since Saturday morning. A consulting engagement, a bridge assessment project for a firm called Meridian Civil Partners that had brought me in to review structural load calculations on a project their junior engineers had flagged. Nothing dramatic. For days of looking at numbers, eating mediocre hotel food, and having a coffee every morning at 6:15 at a diner 2 blocks from the Marriott where the waitress called everyone Han and meant it sincerely. I called Barbara every evening. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, she sounded fine. Tired, maybe, but Barbara Tired sounds like Barbara Cheerful to most people. She has a voice that irons itself out automatically. I have learned, over 39 years, to listen underneath that voice for what is not being said. On Monday evening, October the 10th, I called at 7:30. She picked up on the 4th ring. I said, "How are you feeling?" She said, "Fine, sweetheart." I said, "Did you take your medication?" She said, "Of course." I said, "Did you eat?" There was a pause, a small pause, maybe 1 second, but I have been married to this woman since I was 25 years old. I know her pauses. Raymond and Stacy came by, she said, with Dale and Patrice. We had a nice visit. I said, that's good. Did they stay for dinner? She said, they're still here. It was 7:30 in the evening. I said, are they helping you make dinner? Another pause. I made something earlier, she said. They brought wine. They're fine. I said, are you sitting down? Gerald. She lowered her voice, just slightly. Don't. It's fine. I let it go. I should not have let it go. I said goodnight. Told her I'd be home Thursday, and went to bed with feeling I did not examine, because examining it would have required me to act on it, and I was 450 miles away. Tuesday morning, I woke up at 5:48, took a shower, reviewed my notes from the day before, and decided by 7:15 that I had seen everything I needed to see on the Meridian Project. What I had been asked to review over 4 days, I had completed in 3. I called the project lead, a man named Chuck Ferris, at 8 a.m. and told him my findings were complete and I would send the written summary by end of week. He thanked me, seemed slightly startled, and said to safe travels. I booked a 2:40 p.m. flight on my phone at 8:17 a.m. I did not tell Barbara. I thought about it. I decided I would simply arrive. She would like that. She always liked that, coming home early, finding her reading in the sunroom, watching her face do that thing it did when she was surprised and happy at the same time. I was looking forward to it. I landed at Port Columbus at 6:22 p.m. My truck was in long-term parking on Lot C. I found it where I left it, patted the dash once the way I always do, and pulled out a lot at 6:41. The drive home on 670 East took 23 minutes. I turned onto Birchwood Terrace at 7:04 p.m. There were 2 cars in my driveway, Raymond's Nissan Pathfinder and a white GMC, Yukon that belonged to Dale and Patrice Holbrook. I pulled up to the curb, which is what I do when there are guests, because I was raised to not block people in. I sat in the truck for a moment. The lights in the kitchen were on. I could hear, even from the curb with the engine idling, the sound of voices and what I believe was a television. I went around the side of the house to the front door. I do not know why I went around the side. I cannot explain it exactly. Something in me, even then, was already quiet and listening rather than arriving. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open. The laughter from the kitchen was immediate and loud. Dale Holbrook's laugh specifically. A particular kind of laugh that fills rooms in a way that seems designed to fill rooms. A performance of good humor rather than actual good humor. I recognized it from 11 years of Sunday dinners. And then I heard something else. A sound from the hallway to my left. Very small. A sound like someone shifting position against the wall. I turned. Barbara was on the hallway floor, seated with her back against the wall, her left hand pressed flat against the baseboard, her right hand in her lap. She was wearing her blue cardigan over her pajama top. Her face was the color of old chalk. She looked up at me when she heard my footstep, and the first thing she said, the very first thing before hello, before anything, was, "Don't make a scene." I stood there for what I believe was 4 seconds. I know it was 4 seconds because I counted them afterward the way I always count things, because counting is what keeps me from doing the wrong thing. I said, "How long have you been on this floor?" She said, "Not long." She was lying. I could tell from the way her hand was pressed against the baseboard, flat, deliberate, like she had been using it for balance or simply for something solid to hold on to. I crouched down beside her. I put my hand against her face. Her skin was cold and slightly damp. I said, "I'm going to call 911. She said, "Gerald, please don't." I said, "Barbara." I said it quietly. I did not say anything else. I took out my phone, and I dialed. The kitchen was still laughing. The paramedics arrived at 7:21 p.m. 2 of them, a young woman named Torres and a man named Briggs, stocky, moved fast, had the look of someone who had done this particular drive to this particular kind of house enough times to know what he was walking into. He asked me 3 questions before he even looked at Barbara. How long had she been on the floor? Roughly. Had she lost consciousness at any point? Was she on blood pressure medication? And had she taken it today? I answered the first 2. On the third, I said I didn't know. Briggs knelt beside her. He did not rush. He spoke to her in a calm, Even voice, the way you speak to someone when you need their nervous system to stop working against them. While he worked, Torres took me 2 steps back toward the door and said quietly, "Sir, is there anyone else in the house?" I said, "My son is in the kitchen." She looked at the kitchen hallway, still laughing, still no footstep, no chair scraping back, no sign that anyone had heard the front door open or heard my voice or the sound of radio traffic from the paramedic equipment. Torres did not say anything about that. To her credit, Raymond appeared at 7:24. I know it was 7:24 because that was when Briggs said he needed more space, and I stepped back further toward the living room doorway, which put me in Raymond's line of sight from the kitchen hall. He saw me first. His face did something complicated that I have thought about many times since. It was not shock exactly. It was closer to the expression of a man who has been caught not doing something he knew he was supposed to do. He said, "Dad, you're home early." I said, "I am." He looked at Barbara on the floor, at Briggs, at the equipment. He said, "Is she okay? What happened?" I said, "I don't know yet." He said, "I didn't know she seemed fine earlier. She said she was just going to rest." I said, "Raymond." He stopped. I said, "Go back in the kitchen." He looked at me for a moment. Then he went back in the kitchen. Stacy appeared briefly in the hallway at 7:26 with her hands clasped in front of her chest, the specific posture of someone preparing to perform concern. I looked at her. She went back. Briggs got Barbara stable. Blood pressure had been critically elevated, 178 over 112, consistent with someone who had been on her feet and then on a cold floor for longer than she'd admitted. He recommended transport for observation. Barbara looked at me. I said, "You're going." She said, "The guests." I said, "Barbara." She said, "All right." They loaded her at 7:38. I told Briggs I would follow in my truck. Before I left, he pulled me aside the same way Torres had. He said, "Mr. Hayward, her pressure didn't get to 178 in an afternoon. That's been building. She needed attention before tonight." I said, "I understand." He said, "I'm going to put that in my report." I said, "Good." I watched the ambulance pull away. Then I went back inside. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it and drop your thoughts and comments. I went into the kitchen doorway. Dale and Patrice Holbrook were at my kitchen table with what appeared to be a second bottle of wine. Stacy was at the counter. Raymond was standing near the refrigerator with his hands in his pockets. Dale stood up when he saw me. Big man, big voice. The practice warmed to someone who has shaken a lot of hands. He said, "Gerald, good Lord, is Barbara all right?" We had no idea she was feeling poorly. She didn't say a word to us. You know how she is. She never wants to make a fuss. I said, "Dale." He stopped. I said, "I'm going to the hospital. I'd appreciate it if you'd say goodnight." There was a silence. Patrice looked at Dale. Dale looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at the refrigerator. Dale said, "Of course. Of course. We'll get out of your hair. Please tell Barbara we're praying for her." They were gone by 7:51. I watched the Yukon reverse out of my driveway from the front porch. Then I went back inside and stood in my kitchen for approximately 90 seconds. Raymond was still there. He said, "Dad, I want to explain." I said, "Not tonight." He said, "She really did seem okay. She said she just needed to rest, and we thought." I said, "Raymond." I looked at him. "Not tonight." He looked at me for a long moment. Something passed across his face that I think he would call hurt, and I would call awareness. He said, "I'll come by the hospital." I said, "You don't need to do that tonight." I picked up my keys. I drove my 2011 F-150, dark blue, to Ohio held Riverside on Olentangy River Road, and I sat in a waiting room chair, blue vinyl, under fluorescent lights, next to a television mounted in the corner playing a cooking show on mute, and I drank the worst coffee I have ever consumed in my adult life from a machine near the elevator, and I thought about what I was going to do. I want to be precise about something. What I felt in that waiting room was not rage. I have been asked this since, and I want to be fair about it. I felt something colder than rage. Rage is loud. Rage wants witnesses. What I felt was a particular quiet that falls over a man when he has finished being surprised and started being clear, it is not a comfortable feeling. It is not an uncomfortable one either. It is simply precise. I gave myself the drive to the hospital and the time in that waiting room, about 2 hours and 20 minutes total, to feel whatever I was going to feel. I am not a man who believes in suppressing things indefinitely, but I am also a man who believes that feelings and decisions are two separate departments, and they should not be allowed to run each other. By 9:30 p.m., I had been told Barbara was stable, blood pressure responding to 4 medication, and that Dr. Marsh would review in the morning. I sat with her for 40 minutes. She held my hand. She did not ask me why I was home early. She already knew why, in the way she always knows things without being told. She said, "Don't do anything you'll regret." I said, "I won't." She said, "Gerald." I said, "I promise I won't regret a single thing." She almost smiled. Almost. I kissed her forehead at 10:47 p.m., told the night nurse, a woman named Gloria, mid-50s, efficient and warm, the specific warmth of someone who has seen every version of human nature pass through the same 12 beds, to call me if anything changed. Gloria handed me her direct extension on a small piece of paper and said, "She's in good hands, hon." I believed her. I drove home. I made a pot of coffee I did not need. I opened my laptop at my kitchen desk at 11:14 p.m., and I started with a folder. I want to tell you what was in the folder, because I want you to understand that none of what I did next was impulsive. In the fall of 2020, about 6 months after I co-signed Raymond's mortgage, I sat at this same kitchen table and made a list. I did not make it out of suspicion or pessimism. I made it the way an engineer makes contingency plans, because systems fail and it is better to have a procedure written before you need it. The list had 8 items on it. Each item had a name, an account number or a policy number, a contact phone number, and a notation about what my legal exposure was and how to remove it. I had updated the list twice since then. Once in 2021 when Raymond added a second car to the insurance policy, and once in March of this year when the mortgage was refinanced again and my name remained on the guarantee. I am not going to tell you I was a perfect father. I will tell you I was a present one. I coached Raymond's baseball teams from age 8 through 14. I drove him to every college visit. I sat in an attorney's office in 2018 and helped him negotiate his first commercial lease on a real estate business he eventually closed. I paid his last 2 months of rent when that business closed because he asked me not to tell Barbara, and I kept that confidence even though I thought he should tell her himself. I am not a man who requires gratitude. I am a man who requires, at a minimum, that the people I stood behind do not let my wife sit on a cold floor for an undetermined amount of time while they open a second bottle of wine 20 feet away. That is the minimum. That is all. I called Paul Rutten at 11:22 p.m. Paul is my insurance agent, Paul Rutten Associates, nationwide, on Broad Street. Been my agent for 22 years, voiced like a man who has been awake since 6 a.m. because he usually has been. He did not answer at 11:22 at night, which is appropriate and expected. I left a message that said I needed to remove a secondary driver from my auto policy first thing in the morning, and that I would send an email confirmation tonight. So he had it in writing. I sent the email at 11:24. At 11:31, I called Columbus Midland Bank's 24-hour line and asked to speak to someone in their mortgage guarantee department. After 14 minutes on hold, I reached a man named Terrence who explained that removing a co-signer from an active mortgage required a formal request and typically took 10 to 15 business days to process, but that he could begin the paperwork tonight if I provided my information. I provided my information. He confirmed the request was initiated at 11:46 p.m. and that I would receive written confirmation within 48 hours. I made myself a second cup of coffee at 11:52 that I also did not drink. At 12:08 a.m., I called Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb is not a man who sleeps normal hours. He is a property manager. Marcus Webb, Webb Property Solutions, Dublin, Ohio, 17 years in business. The kind of man who answers a phone at midnight the same way he answers at 9 a.m., with complete attention and no wasted words. Marcus managed 3 rental properties for me that Raymond and Stacy were not aware I owned. He was also the property manager who had helped Raymond find his current apartment when Raymond and Stacy moved out of our house. which meant that Marcus had a professional relationship with Raymond's landlord through a referral I had provided. I asked Marcus to contact Raymond's property management company in the morning and withdraw my informal reference. Marcus said, "Understood." He asked no questions. That is why I have worked with Marcus Webb for 11 years. At 12:34 a.m., I sent an email to a man named Howard Stills at Stills Commercial Realty. Howard is Raymond's professional contact. I had introduced him in 2019, and Howard had given Raymond 2 listings over the past 3 years. The email was courteous. It said that given some changes in my personal situation, I would be stepping back from professional introductions for the time being, and asked that Howard disregard me as a reference going forward. I thanked him for his continued relationship and wished him well. I sat at my kitchen desk. For a while after that, the house was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere on Birchwood Terrace, a dog was barking at something that was not there. I thought about patience. I am, by nature and by practice, a patient man. I have waited out funding cycles on highway projects that lasted 7 years. I have sat across tables from contractors who I knew were lying to me and waited for the documentation to catch up with what I already understood. I believe in waiting. I believe in it the way some men believe in luck, as a discipline, not a hope. But I also believe there are things that do not improve with waiting. And a man who has been patient his whole life still gets to decide at 64 years old, on a Tuesday night in October, that this particular thing is done. At 1:17 a.m., I called my attorney. His name is James Whitfield, Whitfield & Associates, on High Street. 27 years in family and estate law. The kind of attorney who sounds like a library even at 1 in the morning, which is to say calm and organized and slightly amused by the urgency of the world. I did not reach him, which again was appropriate. I left a message. I said, "James, this is Gerald Hayward. I need to speak with you first thing tomorrow about 2 things. First, the status of my name on Raymond's mortgage guarantee and what the fastest legitimate path to removal looks like. Second, I want to update my will. I have been meaning to do this since last spring, and I am not going to wait any longer. Please call me when you're in." I sent a follow-up email with the same information at 1:19 a.m. At 1:43 a.m., I opened Raymond's contact on my phone. I looked at it for a moment. Then I called the number for the credit card company where Raymond and Stacy were authorized users on a card in my name, a card I had added them to in 2021 for household expenses during the renovation, a card I had continued to pay and continued to allow them to use because it had never seemed worth the conversation to close it. The automated system removed both authorized users at 1:47 a.m. I received a confirmation text at 1:49. I closed my laptop at 2:03 a.m. I washed the 2 coffee cups. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to bed. I did not believe I slept. I believe I lay in the dark for approximately 4 hours in the specific not-quite sleep of a man who has finished what he came to do and is simply waiting for morning. James Whitfield called at 7:52 a.m. I was already at the hospital by then. I had arrived at 7:08, sat with Barbara while she had breakfast, the hospital's version of oatmeal, which she ate with the diplomatic patience of a woman who has survived worse, and had spoken briefly with Dr. Yvonne Marsh when she came in at 7:41. Dr. Marsh is a precise woman, wire-rimmed glasses, direct voice, the particular professional calm of someone who delivers complicated information many times a day and has learned to do it without either softening it falsely or making it harder than it needs to be. She said Barbara's numbers were significantly improved. She said she wanted to keep her one more night for observation. She said, and I want to be exact about this, Mr. Hayward, her pressure at admission was consistent with sustained episode, not an acute one. This didn't start yesterday. I said, I understand. She said, someone should have noticed sooner. I said, I agree. I stepped into the hallway to take James Whitfield's call. James, as always, had read both the voicemail and the email before calling, and had already pulled Raymond's mortgage file from our previous conversations. He said, Gerald, I got your message. Let's talk about the mortgage first, because that's the one with real timeline implications. I said, I know the timeline. Terrence at Columbus Midland started the formal request last night. I need you to confirm the paperwork is clean and make sure it actually moves. James said, "I'll call them this morning. Give me the reference number from your confirmation." I gave it to him. He said, "And the will?" I said, "Yes." He said, "How significant are the changes?" I said, "Significant enough that I'd like to do it in person. Can you see me Thursday?" He said, "I can see you at 10 a.m. Thursday." Gerald, a pause. The specific pause of a man who has been a family attorney for 27 years and has learned when to finish a sentence and when not to. He chose not to finish it. He said, "I'll see you Thursday." Raymond called at 8:14 a.m. I was still in the hallway. I let it ring. He called again at 8:22. I answered. He said, "Dad, I've been up all night. Is Mom okay?" I said, "She's better. She's staying one more night." He said, "I want to come by. Can I come by?" I said, "You can come by this afternoon." He said, "Dad, I know you're upset. I want to explain. Stacy's parents, they just showed up. We didn't really plan it. And Mom said she was okay. She told us she was fine." I said, "Raymond." He stopped. I said, "I'm not going to have this conversation on the phone." He said, Okay, this afternoon. I'll be there at 2. I said, "I'll see you at 2. He arrived at 2:07. Barbara was awake, watching the window. Raymond came in, kissed her cheek, held her hand for a few minutes. He was gentle with her. I will say that. Whatever else Raymond is, he is genuinely gentle with his mother when she is in front of him. The problem has never been that Raymond doesn't love Barbara. The problem is that Raymond loves Barbara when she is visible and stops loving her when she is in another room. I let him have 15 minutes with her. Then I stepped into the hallway, and after a moment, he followed me. We stood in the hallway outside her room. The hospital has a particular quality of light in the afternoon, thin and neutral, the kind of light that does not flatter anyone and does not try to. Raymond said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I genuinely did not know she was that bad." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have checked on her more. I know that. We got caught up with Dale and Patrice and..." I said, "Raymond, I'm not looking for an explanation." He said, "Then what are you looking for?" I said, "I'm not looking for anything. I've already done what I needed to do." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means the credit card was closed last night. The insurance policy is being updated this week. And I called James Whitfield this morning about the mortgage guarantee and a few other things." Raymond did not say anything for a long time. The hospital sounds went on around us. A cart rolling, a call button from 3 rooms down, someone's television through a closed door. He said, "Dad." I said, "I'm not angry at you." He said, You can't just..." I said, "I can, and I want to be clear about something. None of it is a punishment. It's a correction. I should have looked more carefully at what I was carrying for you and what you would do with the security it gave you. That's on me as much as anyone. But I'm not going to carry it anymore." He said, "So what, you're just done? You're cutting me off." I said, "I'm removing myself from financial exposure I should not have been in. Your mortgage is your mortgage. Your car insurance should have been yours for 4 years. None of that changes what you are to me. You're my son, but you're 38 years old, and your mother was on a hallway floor last night, and the only reason I know that is because I came home early." He opened his mouth. He closed it. I said, "I'm going back in with your mother now. You should come if you want. But if you're coming in, come in for her, not for this conversation." He came in. We sat together, the 3 of us, for another hour. Barbara fell asleep around 4 o'clock, the way she does, suddenly and completely, her hand still loosely in mine. Raymond sat across the room in the chair by the window. He did not speak. Neither did I. Around 4:45, he got up, said he was going to get some air, and left. I heard his footsteps go down the hallway. I heard the elevator. I did not hear him come back. Barbara came home Thursday afternoon. James Whitfield and I met at 10 a.m. that morning. His office on High Street, 14th floor, pale November light, through tall windows, coffee that was considerably better than the hospital machine's version. We spent an hour and a half together. The will was updated. The mortgage removal process was confirmed and moving. We discuss one additional item that I will not detail here, except to say that it involves a trust structure for Barbara's long-term care that I should have established in 2021, and that I was glad to have finally done correctly. I picked Barbara up from Riverside at 2:30 p.m. She walked out under her own power, which she had insisted upon, and she looked at me when she settled into the passenger seat of the F. 150 with the particular expression she reserves for moments when she knows more than she's saying. She said, "How bad was it?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "What you did while I was in the hospital. How bad was it?" I looked at her for a moment. I said, "It was fair." She considered that. She said, "Did you talk to Raymond?" I said, "Yes." She said, "And?" I said, "He'll be okay. He's 38. He has time to figure out who he wants to be." She said, "And you?" I said, "I'm fine." She reached over and patted my hand once. The way she has since 1985, the specific economy of affection that means she has decided to accept what I've said and move forward. She said, "Take me home. I want to sit in the sunroom." I pulled out of the hospital parking lot. The F-150's engine made its usual sound. Solid, a little louder than necessary, reliable in a way that things that have not been over-engineered tend to be reliable. I drove Barbara home on a Thursday afternoon in October. The leaves on Birchwood Terrace were past peak, most of them down, the trees showing their structure. I have always preferred trees in winter to trees in summer. There is something honest about seeing the shape of a thing without all its decoration. Raymond called 3 weeks later. We talked for 40 minutes. It was a different conversation in the hospital hallway. Quieter, less defensive, more like two people who know each other trying to figure out what that means going forward. I do not know what comes next for Raymond and me. I know we have time. I know he is my son. I know that both of those things are true simultaneously, with everything else that is also true. Some things you can love and still put down. Not everything, but some things. Barbara is home. Her numbers are good. Dr. Marsh moved her follow-up to every 6 months rather than every 3, which is a kind of medical news that sounds small and isn't. She is back in her sunroom with her library books and her chamomile tea, steeped exactly 4 minutes, the specific kind, because apparently the other kind is not worth the bother, a position I have come to respect after 39 years of not fully understanding it. Last Tuesday, she looked up from her book when I brought her tea and said, without preamble, "You should call Raymond." I said, "I just talked to him." She said, "Call him again." I nodded. I called him. A man who has spent 38 years building something. A family, a career, a reputation for being the person who shows up, gets to decide, at some point, what that building is actually for. It is not for people who show up only when inheritance is being discussed. It is not for the people who call the floor sitter dramatic and pour another glass. It is for the person who holds your hand without being asked and tells the paramedic to write it down. Patience is not weakness. Quiet is not absence. And the moment I walked through that front door and heard the sound of laughter coming from the wrong room, that moment was not the end of anything. It was the first moment in a long time that I was completely certain of what I was doing and why. That is not a small thing. At 64, in October, in a hallway in Columbus, Ohio, that is not a small thing at all. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Dad's Roar Revenge. I will see you on the next one.